Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@usaprepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Dial set correctly to USA Prepares. Thank you for being in class with us today. Jason, thank you for engineering the broadcast in Minnesota at GCN. I'm Vincent Finelli. With us today, Doc Ram, Dr. Richard Allen Miller. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you, Vincent. I have a lot of complex things to discuss today, none of which were the four that you listed that are extremely important. The first one is, have any of you noticed how we're all of us semi in a fog lately? Tuesday night, I'm ill. I'm in bed, trying to sleep it out. And 8 o'clock at night, the phone rings. And here it is. Jeff Rentz. I do the first Wednesday of every month. I do it once a month with Jeff. He's like you. He's gotten to the point where he really likes to work with me. So we have a special time that I come on. You're once a week. He's once a month. And he blew it because he thought it was Wednesday and had his engineer call me on Tuesday. Woke me up out of a dead sleep. I, being a trooper, rallied for the situation, and it wasn't until the end of the interview that we both realized that it was not Wednesday, it was Tuesday. Ding, ding, ding. And the other thing I must say, according to my boss, I'm looking forward to Grace Thorne and her visit next year.
Well, next year's not so far away.
Grace, okay, but that's that. And so I'll accept Christmas. That's what I needed to do. Thank you, Vincent. Well, I've got a lot more things to say, but that's what I'll do for the moment.
Okay, since you're talking about the fog.
The fog there. That's what we'll call that movie, The Fog. Yeah, that's a good one.
Well, I've talked to a number of our instructors, and they're all saying pretty much the same thing. And I've been referring to it as, people would say, they'll call me up and they say, how's it going? I'll go, terrible. Ever since they started shutting the lights off at 5 o'clock, it's terrible. And then next time they call 4 o'clock. And then a few days ago, I got a call from a guy and he said, how's it going? I said, it's terrible ever since they started shutting the light off at noon. And I, of course that's an exaggeration. What I'm talking about is the outdoor light it seems to be lower and lower and lower, dimmer, more overcast. And, in the kitchen, we'll be cooking dinner, and let's say it's 6 o'clock, for example. And, I'll say to Mrs. Finelli, she said, it seems like, and she'll say, midnight. And we all feel the same way. We're not getting the things done that we need to get done because they turn the lights off too early. And it's different from when I was a child. I'm talking about the 50s and the 60s. We had more daylight. I think we have fewer hours of daylight now, and I can't prove it, but it feels like that.
So, basically, daylight savings time has made the world ill. It's called biorhythms, and we talk on alternative radio about the deterioration of the pineal gland, the calcification that's occurring. And I did a study for the military on that exact thing years and years ago, and I discovered the primary purpose of the pineal gland was to regulate the body's immune system to seasonal changes. And that's its primary thing. It was there to change your biorhythms and your response to light. That's why people are now finding that these LED computer screens are not the same if you put white light around it. And there's more studies going on in that regard. But guess what? This whole concept of leaping forward and, falling back is not really anything more than trying to make more money on Black Friday. Worse. It's more like it was a farm concept so that you could get out into your fields earlier. Hoorah. But really, it's not a good thing at all. It's actually quite toxic, and the sooner they disperse with that nonsense, the better. Time changes indeed.
Yeah, you're talking about leaping forward and falling down?
Yeah, there you go. That's the way I'm falling over. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, well, okay.
That's the way to handle it, humor. There's no other way to deal with it because we're stuck with Malcolma in the middle, not Malcolm.
Yeah, I understand that's one of the top 10 names for 2019, Malcolma, for boys and girls.
Right.
And those who
by George, there's rain and pain.
And those who don't know, so it's one of the top 10 names, Malcolma. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt decided that during the Depression, the first Great Depression, not the one we're in now, but the first Great Depression, he decided that we needed more shopping days before Christmas. And I'm not kidding about this. No, really.
There it is, man.
No, it's true. This absolutely true. What you said is true. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt decided to extend the Christmas shopping season by 7 days. And he wanted to move Thanksgiving Day back 1 week so that there'd be more days to shop, more people could spend money that they could not even find, and buy things that they didn't need for Christmas. And the United States Congress said no. So had he had his way, Thanksgiving would have been the third Thursday in November instead of the 4th. I'm sorry, November, yes. Hey, by the way, there's a sound coming from my headphones. Is that you?
No, no, sir.
Okay, so I've got an echo. Maybe our engineer. Jason, can you figure this out? It sounds like I've got this strange... Oh, it's me. It is me coming back. I don't know if it's going out over the air or not. I'm going to reconnect
everything is broken today. Everything.
Yeah, right.
Even things that don't break are breaking. Just because they want to show off.
Well, okay. You have a Datsun Z, right? 280, I believe?
Yes.
Okay.
The 280Z, not a 280, the 280.
Yeah,
that's a little clue.
Yeah, and the license plate is Magic, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, how many miles would you say roughly are on that vehicle?
I mean, sorry?
How many miles do you think are on the vehicle? 300,000.
Yeah, okay. Plus. Now, 300,000 plus, and the ports are within 10% of each other in terms of balance.
Well, that's great. That's great. And, that's a good measure of how well the engine's holding up the rings and mostly the rings, but the valves too. All right, so here's the question. Of those 300,000 plus miles, have you ever replaced the front wheel bearings because it's rear-wheel drive?
No.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever thought that, geez, I got over 100,000 miles on here, I better start replacing these wheel bearings? Has that ever occurred to you? No.
Okay. I have put multiple clutches in it.
Yeah, that has something to do with it.
Because I like to drive it the way it wants to be driven. And it's not about the engine. It's about using the engine and the compression. I don't use my brakes. I use my compression to slow my car down.
Yeah. No, I understand. So you're and that's a 5-speed, I believe. So you're shifting up and you're shifting down, and you're just driving like a race car. I understand, but the point I'm trying
to race car. It's not fun to drive. It invites you to drive it. There is a major difference there. Once you do it, I have never had any car in my history, and I raced Lotus. I did all of it, autocrossing, whatever, Triumph. I never had anything that responded to my immediate thought as quickly as this car does, including my Mercedes. None of them came near this.
Well, you mentioned
the finest car I've ever driven.
You mentioned Lotus. You raced Lotus?
Yes.
Did you ever race a
Formula 4? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I did Formula 4, and I have, that's why Vern, pit crew racing chief, he gave the car to me. He said I was the only one in this town that knew how to drive it correctly. He just gave it to me when the new Fords came out. He was the racing, he was our race chief, Ford racing team, and he did all the different cars up Pikes Peak. And this car, the one I have, is the one that won the steeplechase up Pikes Peak against everything in the world. And there was nothing that could take my car. It was the fastest car in the world, and I've kept it just like it ever was. Now, there are cars now that will twist the frame, in there because of power. This thing won't do that, but I can lift the front tires off the ground in 2 gears. Hoorah!
Now, when you raced, what Lotus did you race against? Did you race against a Lotus?
It was that the little one that looks like the MGB. That was a 10. I just 101. I'm not sure. I think it was 101.
Okay, one of the Lotuses, kind of a short windshield, open.
Yes. It was an older one. I think it was in the 66 or 65, something in there. About the time that Ford came out with their 312.
Okay, they had the Lotus Elan, as kind of looked like a Miata.
Might have been Europa. I don't know. I don't remember.
Okay.
It's one of those.
I raced the Lotus Europa.
Yeah, Europa. Those were really well built. This is better. And trust me when I tell you that. For that year, it's unbelievable because it was better than the Porsche. And the Porsche was like 9 times more expensive. And the car just... I love it. I was English racing great. I had Anki wheels, and the engine had been bored out, and so it was extra. I had more stroke arm, and I could 411 in the rear end, like the Ford does. It was a very well designed car. I had some problems with the lightness of it. It's only 1,800 pounds. And I had to put a spoiler on it to hold me down on the ground. I would have gone airborne otherwise. And it doesn't even kick in until around 105 miles an hour. Its rated cross-sectional frontal area, the brake horsepower, is rated at 148. I had it at Pacific Raceways at 168. That's what they clocked me at, 168 miles an hour. And as a stock car. And I was able to, it stabilizes.
Hold that thought. We're going into a break. Dr. Richard Allen Miller's with us, richardallenmiller.com, Richard, A-L-A-N, Miller.com. We're talking about the good old days. And back in the 70s, Rick got a Datsun 280Z. The new name would be Nissan. And it used to be Datsun, D-A-T-S-U-N. And I had a Lotus Europa 1974 twin cam special, and it was a backyard special. Colin Anthony Bruce Chapman was the owner of Lotus, and he took a fiberglass body and mounted it on a very special frame, shaped like an X, and just dropped the body on and bolted it on. The taillights of the Lotus Europa 1974 model twin cam were from a Jaguar XKE, The front suspension was from a Triumph Spitfire. The engine was from a Ford Cortina with a twin-cam head put on it. The alternator was from Delco Remy. The lighting was, the circuitry, the wiring was from Lucas, the goddess of darkness. And, let's see, the transmission was a front-wheel drive transmission for a Renault, also pronounced Renault. And it was turned around. Instead of a front-wheel drive vehicle, they took the front-wheel drive transmission from a Renault, turned it around, and put it in the back of the car, and it became a rear-wheel drive. So the engine was in the middle. It was a Spitfire front suspension. It was a homemade McPherson strut rear suspension, and it was cobbled together. It had 2 gas tanks, each about 7.5 gallons, and it was a really, really fun car to wear. Now, you didn't drive this thing.
That's it. Wear it. That's right. That's right. That's the word. Thank you, Vincent. I needed
and people,
that one.
I'd pull into a gas station back in the 70s, and people would say, wow, how do you like this? And I always said the same thing. I'd like it to run, because the darn thing was always breaking down. It was, and they say if you have an English car back then, whether it be a Triumph or an engine,
they all leak.
what's the first thing you do?
Oil.
What's the first thing you do when you get an English sports car? You oil the hood hinges, because you're going to be opening it a lot. And that's the truth.
Yeah. The bad news was that I raced TR4s, TR3s, and Spitfires also. I Triumphs mostly all through college. I can tell you that Jaguar it designed one of their cars once, older one. They forgot to put the Zerk on the rear axle, and what they did is they designed a shitty gasket so it would leak the oil correctly, and that was Lotus. I mean Jaguar. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Lotus was probably one of the worst constructed cars ever made. The windows, the side windows, would go down about 2/3 of the way. And the reason was the window was taller than the door. So the door wasn't high enough to accept the whole window going down. And I remember going through toll booths on the East Coast, and when I got to a toll booth, the basket was higher than the car. So I'd have to, lean out and throw the quarter up to the basket because that's how low this thing was. And the only way I could find the car in a parking lot was I would look to what appeared to be an empty parking space, because the hood of this Lotus was as high as the door handle on a Ford.
Yeah. Yeah.
I should say the roof. The roof was as high.
Personalities, yeah.
But it was a really cool looking car. Class, if you want to look it up, it's called the Lotus, Lotus, space Europa, Europa.
Before the Europa, I did something before Europa, and I can't remember what that number. It's like 101 or something. It was, there was no bonnet. Didn't have a bonnet. Had a single seat.
And they were waterproof. And they were waterproof because they needed to be.
Yeah, England, yeah.
Because you didn't know if that car was going to make it through that turn or not. It's likely to wet your pants driving a Lotus.
Listen, on my Z, I can go into a hard corner, all four, sliding in on all four tires. If it's dry, I've got complete control.
Class Dr. Richard Allen Miller's with us. RichardAllenMiller.com. Richard, A-L-A-N, Miller.com. Rick, we were talking about lighting and how it's dark and people are in a fog and everyone is complaining about this. No one likes it. So President Donald Trump, here's our request. Let's forget this daylight savings time. Let's just forget all about it. Oh, really? And I believe that he has people who listen to the independent media and tell him what what really is happening. So in this light of light, there's a website that I went to that talks about the ballast of fluorescent light bulbs. Now, I happen to like, well, incandescent is the best, but the problem is Hillary Clinton and ilk as such as that have decided that we don't need any incandescent light bulbs. So what we really need, instead of 25-cent light bulbs, we need expensive light bulbs. And the claim was that we're destroying the environment. So what she wanted is these mercury curly Q type compact fluorescents that last about a year or two, and then the mercury goes into the landfill. Well, the older style that was around since Nikola Tesla, I think he was involved in the invention of the fluorescent lighting system, those bulbs can last 8,000 hours or more, maybe even 15 or 20,000 hours, which is great, depending on how many starts the light goes through. So the more times you power up the light for a short period, the shorter the lifespan. So if you have a fluorescent light bulb, like in a store, they turn them on and it's on most of the day, they last a long time in terms of hours. If you were to put one in a bathroom and you in, out, and you flip the light switch on, off, it wouldn't last very long at all. So there have been studies about these kinds of things, and some of the studies are how do people react to the different colors of light, and other studies have looked at how do people react to the flicker rate, if you will, of these fluorescent light bulbs. And there are three major types of ballast. There's the magnetic, which is like a transformer, 60 cycles. Then there would be a type called instant start, and then there's rapid start, and actually there's a fourth type, and that'd be the electronic ballast. So they found out that in terms of recognizing words, like in an office setting, the magnetic ballast was not as good for people to recognize words correctly. The electronic ballast, which had a higher frequency of flickering, if you will, people were about 15% more able to recognize words correctly. And then in the area of inputting, like typing in appointments and things like that, data about people, the magnetic ballast was way worse than the electronic ballast, which operates at a higher frequency. And then the overview of screen reaction processing time, meaning how long does it take to react and type something in, the electronic ballast was way faster, maybe 30% faster. And then the recognition of differences in details, the recognition time, about 30% faster with the electronic ballast as compared to the original magnetic, 60 cycle ballast. So, Rick, there have been studies going on for quite some time with lighting and office people and office workers, and let's get more out of them, and let's see if we can have them less fatigued.
More juice out of the turnip, more blood out of the turnip, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Colors, like hospitals, will paint certain rooms because you actually repair or heal quicker with color on the wall. You perform better with certain colors on the wall. You dance better. They're all different colors. Oh, that sounds like chakras and vibratory centers in the body, and how you resonate with this and you don't resonate with that, and you're from a different star system. Good luck with all of that. That's all Appendicad stuff. In fact, Appendicad spent a great deal of the sciences another epoch backward, where color could be used like Gabriel Horn, and color and sound were used as weapons and weapons of war. And today, we now realize that certain bandwidths and frequencies affect different organs, and all organs are affected by some wavelength, and that means that the entire spectrum has an effect on the body, And if you go to Mars where the light is different, you're going to probably behave different. That's a metaphor.
And I'm wondering if certain lights have the capability of making people dizzy.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's easy. Strobe lighting will cause your brain to go into seizure if done correctly. You can drop someone out with flicker rate. That's why televisions are kind of creepy in some ways. In fact, guess what? I did studies, and then they started using as a way of brain entrainment when they would go to commercial. The TV flicker rate would change. Isn't that interesting? But wait, like Dorito corn chips, we'll make more.
Okay, so the incandescent light bulb has a tungsten filament, and when electrons try to travel across it to complete the circuit, there's so much resistance that tungsten filament, if you were to look at a clear incandescent light bulb class, you would see a filament. It looks like a spring, a tiny, tiny, tiny spring running, being supported by two heavier wires. And that tungsten element is so resistive to the flow of electricity that it will start to glow. And it starts glowing very quickly. As a matter of fact, it glows almost, yellow, white hot. And that is where the light comes from. But unfortunately, that resistance, most of the electricity in that's used to power up that light bulb, the incandescent, goes to heat. That's why they're so hot you can't touch them.
Inefficient is the word that would be used where the LED systems that are now being used are essentially they're way more efficient in terms of the use of energy. And what we're now finding with things like vertical aquaculture, that you have different light for different crops. Broccoli wants this bandwidth, cauliflower wants that. And if you do that, you can really fine-tune your production ratios and yields. And we've discovered that with marijuana in the studies we did early on in lunar base alpha 1, where you hit it with long ultraviolet, and all of a sudden the cultivar will change to a different species, cannabis indica as opposed to sativa. And then you had different kinds of crosses that will prefer certain bandwidths, and so we'll use Humboldt rather than Josephine County. Imagine that.
So when we're talking about lighting, Rick, the reason I mentioned incandescent lighting is that tungsten element has to heat up and in order to produce light, near white in color, but it's more yellow, but we'll say near white in color. Well, because that element has to heat up, and because the electrical current in the United States, alternating current, AC current, oscillates at 60 cycles per second, so it goes back and forth 60 times in a second. Which is different, by the way,
than Europe, which is 50 cycles.
Right, so 50 cycle we'd be more likely to see the flicker in Europe than we would.
Yes and no. There are advantages and disadvantages, and why. The U.S. does 60, and Europe and Asia does 50. When you travel, you have to carry a converter because your appliances lawnmower from my face. And I used to call it, man, won't function.
Right, because our electric motors in the United States are designed to operate on 60 cycles per second, for the motors to operate properly. And so where I'm going with this is the incandescent light bulb, because it actually heats up, is more immune from the variation of the cycles per second as compared to an electronic light bulb, kind of like an LED.
Yes.
So the flicker rate is more pronounced, even though the electricity powering both of them, if they're plugged into 120 volt alternating current, even though the power source is the same, the incandescent appears to flicker less because of the physics of heating that tungsten element. And the LEDs respond much faster to the alternating current. So I believe...
Yeah, the problem is, one of the problems are that, you know, when you start choosing cooler systems, unfortunately, you also get with that not infrared, which is what you're talking about, heat, because there's a lot of, that's not heat, it's actually a different bandwidth of light, and it's called heat, infrared. What you're getting is long ultraviolet. Long ultraviolet is easier to see from a long distance away because it's not absorbed by the atmosphere. And as a result, very hard on your eyes. And so somebody that has an automobile that they've changed the bulb from the white light, the normal white, yellow light that most of us are familiar with, and all of a sudden there's this sharper, bluer light that's coming through. That is not really very good. And cop cars, especially in Oregon, and I don't know about other states, but the ones they use here should be. Oh, literally, that's like being a bully, because when they come up with that light, I mean, you can't hardly think of anything else. It's so bad and so hard on your light as to be criminal.
So I'm thinking about, so I'm thinking about these LEDs. And if you were to look inside just a regular A19 or Edison-based light bulb, you would see these little point source LEDs. And it's little specks of solid-state electronics, and they put maybe 10 or 15 of these little point sources in an array, and it appears that it's just a larger array of light coming up, but there's mostly these little point sources. And I believe that they're really hard on the eye. And so I have compared light that comes out of a 120-volt LED running on AC versus the same point sources that come out of 12 volts DC, and the 12-volt DC is easier on the eyes than the same LEDs which have been run through a converter inside the light bulb, a driver, if you will, to make the 3-volt LEDs run on AC. We'll be right back. Dr. Richard Allen Miller's with us, and we're talking about lighting, and we're talking about can it make you dizzy, and the answer is yes, and it can cause seizures. And the reason that I wanted to mention this, class, is that I believe that these LED light bulbs are nowhere near as good as we have been led to believe they are. I believe that in my world, the incandescent light bulb is the best for the body, but it's not the best for energy consumption. It uses way more energy than for the lumens that you get from the incandescent light bulb as compared to fluorescence, which would be better, and then LEDs would give you even more lumens per watt, if you will. But what we've determined is that the incandescent light bulb has an ability to resist flickering because of the I'm trying to think of the word. It has like the inertia, the thermal inertia of the element, the tungsten element.
They call it the rise time in electronics.
That's right. That's exactly right. The rise time. So, Rick, fluorescent, in your world, what do you think is the best way to go? Is it, all things being considered, incandescent?
I love the Marquis de Sade and working with quill and candle. Or the English, the bell, book, and candle. There it is. I'm kidding. I think that lighting per se is a form of technology that may not necessarily be necessary in more advanced forms of enlightenment. I like the dark. I go internal. That's what they call a deprivation chamber. That's where a lot of magic occurs, is in your mind's eye. And it's not out there It's inside. It's not what you're seeing. It's what you are creating.
That's interesting that we're talking about this, because I was thinking about the original dimmer switches that we saw. You know, those rotary dimmer switches, but back in the 60s.
One of those on me.
Well, it was kind of like time division, and really what they did was they would take the flow of electricity, and if the switch were just on, powering up that incandescent light bulb, you'd have 100% of the electricity. But at the 50% rate, they would turn on and off the electricity very quickly. And so it would be on half the time, off half the time. So it'd be like buzzing. And that's why if you turn on a radio, an AM radio in the same house as one of those incandescent light dimmers, it would bzzz, because that was the on-off cycle of the dimmer. And so that's like time division multiplexing, if you will, where you sample, you just give a little bit of electricity for a short time, and then you power on, off very quickly. But because the light bulbs had this thermal mass that you didn't see the flicker with the incandescent light bulb dimmers that was there, because the filament would have to heat up, cool down, heat up, and it stayed hot long enough that you didn't see the flicker. But I'm concerned about today's LEDs because they can flicker at 1,000 times per second, and we don't see it, but it's there.
Well, we don't, but a bee does, and a cat does, and the way other animals respond is quite different than the way a human being responds, because their eyes are quite different and designed to do other things than what ours are designed to do.
And that's a really interesting point, because how many of us don't even think about the things that we cannot see with normal vision, but we don't think that this got to be tough from a cat's eye view or a dog's eye view.
Cats are so grumpy. I'm just kidding. But in terms of insects, now you have a way of murdering certain insects over others that you do not. And imagine that is a metaphor as a weapon for human beings. And well, let's say blood type or whatever. Hoorah.
You know, I built this.
Imagine that, huh? Yeah.
I built a studio in the house, and actually I moved from one part of the house to another part of the house, and I took over the dining room, and I liked it because the dining room had a lot of windows. And I it had 2 chandeliers over a 9-foot-long harvest table. And you've been in our dining room, haven't you, Rick?
I'm sorry?
Yeah. You've been in our dining room in our house, right?
Yes, of course.
Well, that was where my studio was. And
really?
it had 2 chandeliers, and I put these candelabra LED bulbs in it. I hated them. I couldn't stand it.
Yeah.
So I
try candles like a church says.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's your flicker.
Yeah, and that flicker rate's really, that's a really low flicker rate. Maybe, 2 cycles per second. When we come back, can we talk a little bit more about what is your preference? Would you prefer LED? Would you prefer incandescent? Would you prefer fluorescent? And which color spectrum do you think is the best overall for most of us? Dr. Richard Allen Miller is with us. I'm Vin Finell. Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Dr. Richard Allen Miller is with us. Richard, ALAN Miller.com. Rick, we were talking about lighting, and people feel dizzy. They feel faint. They have medical problems, seizures from lighting. It's been indicated that these are the sources of some of these problems. And so in terms of lighting, you can have lighting that's warmer in color, more toward the reds. You can have lighting that's cooler, more toward the blues. What are your thoughts about incandescent, LED, and fluorescent lighting? Which do you think is the best overall value for us?
I think I like incandescent for general all-purpose outdoor nightlight, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. LED is actually a real good nightlight, but it won't bring in the moths. And a yellow light bulb will absolutely stop that nonsense. So, there's advantages and disadvantages to each system. Ultimately, they all are toxic at some level. Ultimately, they are all unnatural at some level. And whenever you go against Mother Nature, there it is, and unnatural. And what is a rise? They called those back in other centuries ataxic tides. Different than lunacy and the lunar phases of the moon. And these concepts of light and how plants will germinate differently in moonlight and grow a different kind of crop has obviously been part of what we are becoming. And to change that for convenience, like I no longer want to use my mind, I'll use my, what I'm seeing is people becoming more mindless with advanced technology. That means they know less how to do something should something break, for example.
Yeah.
And convenience.
Yeah, we hardly know how to do anything.
What's that, sir? Okay.
We hardly know how to do anything. As a matter of fact, Home Depot, the big box, we'll call it home accessory company or home improvement company, that they are literally teaching people young people, how to use a tape measure. One of those Stanley type things that you'd have.
I cannot believe it.
Yeah, see, this line,
just being able to look
this
at
line,
it
says, right. This line right here on the tape measure says 12. That means 12 inches. That's the same as a foot. And the line that's right after that, that's 13. That's an inch longer. And then in between 12 and 13, that would be a half an inch. And then the line between the half an inch and the 12, that would be a quarter of an inch.
So
that's how you read a tape measure. But we have to teach. 7/16
bigger. The kid can't figure that out, which is larger.
Right. Well, okay. I have a friend who was in Amelia, Virginia, and it was right down the street from the high school. And he was a client of ours. We built a network for his machine fabrication company. So I built this network, and I was in his office one day, and we were just kind of chatting, chewing the fat. And he pulled out this 6-inch long stainless steel ruler. He kept it in his pocket because he ran a machine shop. And it had measurements in the 32nd of an inch range. So there's lines for every 32nd of an inch. And he told me that he would pull out, a young boy would come in from the high school walking down the street and say, "Hey, I need a job." And he'd say, "Okay, show me 3 5/16 inches on this ruler." It was a showstopper right there. The interview was over. This is a high school student. How is that possible? How is that possible? But that's where we are. Now, if you want to do something really complicated, like changing your oil, now that's that's really difficult, right? So, you mentioned Flickr a number of times. So did I. And we talked about bees and plants. Do you think plants have a reaction to Flickr? Are they sensitive as we are, as bees are?
Well, they're more sensitive in some areas, having to deal with cell migration and cell salts moving through the lattice in a tree, capillary action, etc. There's all kinds of physics going on with different levels of organism response. In the soil, it's like your gut. You have everything from microbes right on up into thrip and nematode, different hierarchies. And each one is considered, okay, like a nematode is considered bad, but in aquaculture, it's necessary to have nematode because it moves cell salts from the bath of nutrient that the plant's growing in into the cell wall. And so and that, by the way, is most likely affected by flicker rate of the light and the way the plant itself is dialoguing with the community it finds itself in. The correct way to look at that. And so, yeah, flicker rate is absolutely incredibly important, but we haven't chosen to study that yet, per se. There's people like me that can speculate on flicker rate and ratios of why by gating the frequency bands at this flicker, this will happen over that in terms of getting better marijuana, and you probably have done those studies, all of you. I know I did, and, keeping a log on why I want to do it this way over that way, and what evolves is protocols, and they all differ for everything.
Okay, so if we look around us, if we're outside, no one I know has said, gee, the sun really has a terrible flicker rate. No one has said that. No one I know has ever talked about the sun's light being flickering. Now, we see things like the clouds interrupting the flow of light, if you will, but the sun's light does not seem to flicker as far as I can tell. And is that because of this immense mass of balling of gases that are on fire? So it's almost.
Well, yes, and no. The sun flickers, and we have boils coming off it in frequency bands called sunspots. It has solar minimums. It has going through space. It might be dragging some dark matter. It has measurable flicker rate changes, yes. And the atmosphere, with its constant changing, the weather patterns, and so the denser here, and now it's not as dense, flicker rate, in terms of experiencing it from the absorption bands, there's a lot of physics going on here, way more than anybody at GE or, Montana are going to discuss. And because they've chosen to study that, it's not important. But subtlety is becoming way more important. And what I'm finding is I don't like to write by candlelight. That's crazy. My eyes go. But that's one of the reasons I use a light. But candidly, I'm healthier without them.
So do you like the warm white or the cool light for most purposes in your life? When
well,
you're
in terms of convenience, wear, in terms of replacement, yes, of course, get a grip. I mean, you tell me. Yes, of course. But unfortunately, everybody stopped using those at one moment. I can't believe it. Why? We can make more money. Just like they did with Mopar. The whole thing is driven on Black Friday as a metaphor. It's crazy.
You've been in our kitchen many times, and the kitchen cabinets are kind of a clear coat on top of white oak. Okay, and these are tall cabinets. And I experimented with lighting. I thought, well, I wonder. Let's try warm white, and I'm talking about LED lighting. Let's try. We have can lights in the kitchen, a significant amount of can lights facing down right over the counters. And I tried warm white, and I liked it. And then I put in next to the warm light, I put in some of these. When I say warm white, I'm talking about 3,000 degree Kelvin. Then I put in some 5,000 degree Kelvin, and it made the kitchen cabinets look terrible. If we were going to sell the house to somebody who just walked in, and I put in the 5,000 degree Kelvin LED lights. They say this is terrible. I can't. These cabinets look like they're junk. But you take those 5,000 degree bluish white lights out, and you put in warm white. The cabinets look great. Now they're the same darn cabinets, but it really affects the color of the walls. It affects. I think it affects the mood. As a matter of fact, when I bought glasses at the Chinese factory outlet, they tinted them the wrong color. I wanted light rose color, not pink, but just light rose color. And for reading on these computer screens that I have in front of me, and they made them gray, brownish gray, and they were horrible. And they wanted to know what I thought, and I said, I don't want these. They make everything look gloomy. So I believe, and Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, but at least for me, the color of the light has a dramatic impact on how I feel. Is that everybody, or is it just me?
That is the science of color that has emerged as an alternative system of healing. That's why hospitals paint their recovery rooms this color and the surgery rooms that color. Now they're removing carpets because of this kind of bacteria and that kind of mold. And they all are driven on color, and color is a reflection of bandwidth of light. And so it all comes back to that point you're making. Everything has a response to various bandwidths. And what we're doing is trying to map where the one begins and the other stops in terms of feeling good or health, healing, and or sleepy time or whatever.
When we come back, Rick, can we talk about duct work? A lot of heating systems in America use ductwork, forced hot air heating and cooling. Can we talk about what kind of light to put in there if we want to kill mold and bacteria? Let's talk about that when we come back. Dr. Richard Allen Miller is with us. So, class, if you look outside at the roofs of many of the houses in the United States, you'll see that they've got mold on them, black mold on the roof. Mostly those roofs that point to the north, where they don't get blasted by the sun's light, during the day. So the question is, what about these air conditioning ductworks and these heating ductworks? They used to be, heating ductworks in the 1950s, 1960s were made out of galvanized sheet metal, and they were uninsulated. And so they had a smooth type surface on the inside where the air blows through them. But now the ducts are insulated on the inside. So there'll be some kind of a, almost like horsehair carpet padding, but it's not horsehair. It would be a polyester type woven or mat to absorb sound. And they put those on the inside of the ductwork. So if you have moisture in there, it's like a petri dish for growing mold. So Rick, for those of us who have that kind of ductwork in our house, or we have mold in our basement, is there a light that you recommend that we deploy in our ductwork or in areas where there is mold to kill it? Can we kill it with light?
Yeah, long ultraviolet will do it. So the longer UVs will murder everything. LEDs could be used simply, cheap, inexpensive. I use apple cider vinegar on myself, but, that because you've got a lot of mold everywhere on your body. I mean, it's creepy when you take different lights and look at your body under different bandwidths. That freaked you out.
Well, no, I have.
Cabinets look weird.
No, I have, Rick. I've in our automotive shop, which is part of our farmhouse, we use ultraviolet light, at least little pen lights, to look for leaks in air conditioning systems. So most refrigerant has a dye.
And when you talk about light, you say there's no difference between light and sound except in frequency bandwidths of frequency. And so really what you're talking about is ELF, or electromagnetic spectrum, not just light per se. Light most people's definition is the rainbow. Visible light. But some people see and hear different bandwidths than others, or not. That's why I have hearing aids and things like that. So it's a study that is important because it has to do with where you belong and how you place food chain and environment, where you belong in it. And guess what? It's not at the top.
Okay, so that brings another question, and I've heard two responses. Actually, I've heard three responses to this question. Is light, visible light, is it photons? Is it particles? Is it wavelengths, or both?
Yes, it's all of it, because the concept, like space and time, are constructs. As they are not real. That's a hard one to understand unless you realize that it is experienced differently in different altered states and ages. Are we there yet? And the older man, what happened to the time? I lost myself in da-da-da-da. You say time is a duration of consciousness, and space, is it curved or is it straight? So, like the shortest distance between 2 points. Is it a straight line or is space curved? And the correct answer is yes, because it's both, predicated on how you choose to make an assumed truth. Assumed truth is the first thing you do in physics, before you start with definition, you start with assumed truth, one of which is that space and time are real. They're not. And that's why we're not sure whether we have a particle or a wave. The Michelson-Morley experiments. There he goes. And is it quantized or is it, analog? Yes.
Okay, we come back. Let's talk about Sidney Gottlieb, the most prolific.
That is rich.
The most prolific torturer of his generation. Class, Rick Miller's with us, Dr. Richard Allen Miller. Website, richardalanmiller.com. richardalanmiller.com. He's known as the poisoner-in-chief. Sidney Gottlieb and the CIA were searching for tools, chemical tools for mind control. There's a book written by Stephen Kinzer, Kinzer. It's called Poisoner-in-Chief. So in 1951, Sidney Gottlieb started working at the CIA. He was given control of the chemical division of the technical services staff. And that's the department that built the tools of espionage. He was tasked with coming up with drugs and methods to control the human mind. And he worked extensively with LSD. And so when we talk about Nazis like Josef Mengele and how evil he was, well, we had our own. His name was Sidney Gottlieb, the most prolific torturer of his generation. And he used drugs, potent drugs, extreme temperatures, food and sleep deprivation, and electric shock for his mind control experiments on human expendables. Expendables in quotes. So, Dr. Richard Allen Miller, LSD, mind control, electroshock control, sleep deprivation, chemical poisoning, see how it works, mind altering. What are your thoughts about all this?
I think sleep deprivation is possibly the strongest psychedelic reaction that there is. Psychedelic meaning altered state of consciousness. Sleep deprivation, in my opinion, creates more vivid experiences, including paranoia and the rest of it, than any drug I know of. And I've explored them all in and out of laboratories. We did formal studies on ketamine, telepathine, and BZ gas, and Jacob's ladder gas. is a real creepy one. If you've seen Jacob's Ladder, the movie, that is exactly the experience someone might have on BZF. 10 years of experience and memory, and it's only just a moment where you're dying on an operating table in Vietnam. Now, altered states of consciousness, like wounds, are actually true blessings from God. They are not bad. We have categorically classified them as unwanted, and yet consciousness is one of the more weirder sleep states that we are experiencing. And when I say that, I mean there are, when you wake up, the moment of waking up, the experiences you're having have more content to literal reality than where you are right now. And where you are right now has just changed. And you're constantly going in and out of daydreams, thinking thoughts, responding to what I'm saying, and it takes you into a place where you go introspection. There are a multitude of altered states of consciousness that are deemed, I'm fine. Now, the reason that we have these fears is because the laws of physics change, and we haven't mapped those out yet. And when you deal with methamphetamine, for example, and the strength of like an ant that can pick up 10 times its weight, how is that possible? Constructs, laws of physics, and leverage, and arc. It's what is now disturbing is that even now medicine is acknowledging that placebo, the mind's eye, what you think is happening, accounts for maybe 10% of your healing. However, in an altered state using psychedelic mushrooms, the placebo can go to 60%. How does that work? What's going on? Well, nobody knows. I don't. I have postulated, but that doesn't mean I'm right, and good luck with that, because even if I have a worldview model, which apparently I am writing right now for a bunch of universities that are working with me, it doesn't mean it's going to be around in 50 years, because the laws of physics change, just like altered states. And when you go into an altered state, you are literally changing the laws of physics, because there is, in my system, no TOE, or theory of everything. What it comes down to is your mind's eye. And that's what made us God's favorite, because you now can become what you envision as God. And guess what? That's only halfway to God.
Okay, so if an ant can lift
without
carry
the physics of being able to do that, just because it has an exoskeleton structure does not mean it has that strength. How does it do that?
Huh? Well, here's the question. So if an ant can carry 10 to 50x, okay, his or her his own weight, okay, but they don't live very long. They live a couple of weeks to maybe a few months. Now, hold that thought, and then let's go to drag racing, okay? You can take that
drag racing. There you are. You're good.
Yeah, I'm not talking about New Orleans. I'm talking about on the track. Okay, so if you take a car engine and you modify and you say, you know what, we're using atmospheric pressure and we're using fuel injection, modern engines, and we get X amount of horsepower. But if we take a supercharger and we blow more air in there, we'll get way more horsepower. But the engines don't last as long. Okay, so you might, out of a top fuel dragster, you might get one race, and then the engine's shot. If you, because you're getting so much heat, so much horsepower, you're stressing the system, the physical engine, so much that it burns out really like in six seconds. as compared to getting a few 100,000 miles out of a conventional gasoline engine that's running on the road. All right, so the analogy is the automobile and the shortened life expectancy versus the ant and the chemical supercharging of that ant to live 10 to 50x. Is that the same thing in people, that if people use drugs, they wear out faster? No. I don't know. Hey, did we lose Rick? Yeah, did we? Looks to me like I'm still connected. Am I still connected? According to my meters, I'm connected. But according to, I don't see Rick. Don't see him at all. So, Jason, are you there? So, I don't know. But maybe we can call Rick and see if we can get him back. But I can tell you this, I'm looking at the mail here, and I finally received my permit to operate my vehicle on the street. And so I got my driver's license. And the gal from the U.S. Postal Service delivered it yesterday, and I said, well, let's see what this looks like. And she said that my driver... Hey, Rick, you're there.
Yes, I am, and I apologize. I have no idea what just happened.
Yeah.
Isn't that coincidentally interesting?
I was actually, before we started on this topic, I was going to mention, I wonder how long it's going to take before we get disconnected when we talk about Sidney Gottlieb, the most prolific torturer of...
Coincidence says, I don't know if I'm going to make anything on that. I'll just simply say, go straight to heaven, ding, 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 ding. This is weird. This is happening to me all around, and guess what? What doesn't kill me makes me stronger. Hoorah.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. So back to Sidney Gottlieb. I'll tell you the story, class, about my driver's permit, some other time. But so Sidney Gottlieb started in 1951 working with the CIA, and they put him in charge of this chemical division where he experimented on people. Now, who did he experiment on? Well, those are people who he would spike colleagues' coffee and drinks with tasteless and odorless drugs. He'd watch them get high, and he'd dance the jig, and he'd be all excited because this was so much fun for him. But he would literally chemically torture people to see how it would work. And these are people who were experiments, prisoners, addicts, mentally and terminally ill patients, and unwitting people, and even children. That's what this guy did with chemicals. And he thought he was a patriot. He thought that he was in service of his country, torturing people to see how far he could push them, how far he could twist them, how he could extract information from people without them wanting to release information by chemically altering their minds. So the one question that I was asking about the ants and the supercharging of engines, if you push an ant so that he carries so much weight, 10 to 50x his own weight, they wear out really fast. They only last a few weeks, maybe a couple months. The engines of the drag strip, that would be these really powerful engines, they would last 6 seconds before they would be worn out. Would we wear ourselves out if we took chemicals like Sidney Gottlieb was using, Rick? Would we die faster?
So these drugs that you're talking about are actually toxins. They're not what make you high. Mostly it is not like LSD that makes you high. It's your brain's response to the LSD. It freaks the brain out because the chemistry coming in is very similar, but not the same as your neurotransmitter. And so the brain immediately tries to protect itself by overflooding itself with its own chemistry, and you have an aha moment from your own brain, not from the toxin that you just took. That's how it truly works. Immunoceutical. Now, it's your immune system. Now, with that said, that means that you can generate these chemistries without taking drugs. How can you do that? Your mind's eye, when you close your eyes and focus on certain sacred geometries, you actually can release specific neurotransmitters. And oh, guess what? I wrote a book. I actually wrote 3 books on that, unpublished, on the next stage in the evolution of man following the non-local mind. And that has to do with video feedback, where you use sound and light as another way to communicate to the brain than just sound or light.
Hold that thought. Hold that thought. We'll be right. So here's the salient point, Dr. Richard Allen Miller. So if you live in the city and there's a common thread through all of these products. So bread, rolls, breakfast, lunch, and dinner in restaurants, soup from cans, cola, beer, you name it. If you're going to eat it and it is manufactured or prepared for you in the city, it is going to be made with municipal water. Can LSD be put in the municipal water supply and help everybody? Is that possible, Rick?
I believe they've already done it. In some actual studies, they actually did that. And that, to me, is the ultimate crime of drugging somebody without their permission.
When I was at the university, there would be parties and, they would have punch and brownies and so forth. And I would never drink punch, never, because that was in the 70s and punch bowls were being spiked. So I would only drink, and the drinking age where I was happened to be 18. So it was really easy to be a college student and be legally permitted to have alcoholic beverages. So I would only have something that was from a sealed container, from the factory, like a beer. Okay. And really, because I was very concerned about that, because at that time, there were lots of people drugged from punch bowls. Literally. Do you remember those days?
I was there, man. I did for my first hit of LSD in 1964. Mm-hmm. I've been doing it a long, long time. I have no idea what I'm talking about, truly. And there's people that are concerned, and it's okay, because you better buckle up. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
So, Rick, are there permanent effects that are negative to consuming LSD?
You see, negative and positive is a Christian thing, and dealing with absolutes. They love this and hate that, rather than work from.
No, that's not what I mean. I mean, you're driving along, you're behind the wheel of a vehicle, and all of a sudden you see something that's not there. Does that ever happen? Can that happen?
You do that all the time. That's because you do, with no light, for example, start to see what they call ectoplasm. Your mind, in a sensory deprivation chamber, if there isn't anything to feel or sense, will create something, which is real.
Well, and that's what I meant by a negative effect. Okay, so let's say
it's not negative or positive. It's Malcoma in the middle, and man is just a very tiny ant in the wheel of evolution. There are mammals on this planet, in my humble opinion, that are way more evolved than man is. This is not about man. It's about man's place in the scheme of things.
I gotta tell you, I think my dog is actually our dogs. We get 3 of them, and all 3 of them are a lot nicer than some people I know.
Well, then there it is. Read it and weep.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so is it possible for we'll just use me, for example. Let's say I was, and I wasn't, but let's say I was exposed to LSD in the 70s. And let's say it was a significant dosage. Is it possible that I could be behind the microphone like today or any other broadcaster and then see something that's not there and then totally do something that I would not normally do on the air? Is that possible?
You just did.
Gee. All right, so why was the CIA so concerned about LSD? What
they're like 10 years out. It's like a men who stare at goats. 10 years after the military, after Navy actually did studies, then the Army wants to try to weaponize it. And what do you think the CIA want to do with it? Yeah, there it is. So, with that said, buckle up. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
Okay, so literally, we could have somebody at the soup factory, and I'm not going to name any of these soup factories, but there's plenty of them, and they make soup. So somebody could literally go in there and just say, I've got a little extra LSD. I can just flip. Nobody will see it because it's such, a few drops. And I put it in that kettle, and it'll be in lot 126973. And is that possible?
It's not only possible. What do you think raves are all about?
I was having a good day until 9 o'clock this morning.
Thanks, Ben.
Dr. Richard Allen Miller, I love you, and I want to thank you for being with us. And I was thinking I was doing some tractor therapy, getting our driveway and bringing it back home yesterday for several hours. And I was thinking about how fortunate I am to have friends such as Dr. Richard Allen Miller, Nora Shirley, Rich Sheevan, Gwyneth Isaacs, Kyle, George, Joey. The list goes on and on and on. Thank you all so much. And Rick, thanks for being with us.